Welcome to this week's edition of New York Now. I'm Dan Clark. Crime continues to be a top issue in the New York news cycle. New York City Mayor Eric Adams held a press conference this week highlighting a handful of people who've been repeatedly arrested in the 5 boroughs. And that press conference reignited the debate over bail reform and whether it's driving the higher crime rate. The issue is almost entirely political. Republicans have framed it as a main driver of crime, and we know from polling that crime is a top election issue. And Democrats have slammed Republicans for that, saying they're spreading misinformation to score political points. But the truth is, there has been no independent research and analysis outside the media with a clear answer on who's right. And that's put Governor Kathy Hochul in a tough spot, trying to lower crime rates through work with law enforcement while defending the state's bail laws. You'll remember that she worked with lawmakers to amend those laws in April. Here's what she told reporters this week.
It's hard to draw correlations between what's going on and bail when you see an escalation of crime all over the country. Other cities are in far worse shape than our major cities, but I don't take comfort in that. The job is still not done. I want to be the first state where we slow down the increase in crime. We start going down.
And those issues of crime and bail reform could have a big impact on this year's elections. We saw the first polls released this week on New York statewide races after the June primary. Let's get into the numbers with Michael Gormley from Newsday. Thank you for being here.
Good to be here.
So it's always fascinating when we get the first look after a primary, because now we know kind of a baseline of where we are going into the general election. So let's start with a race that I think most people will know about, the governor's race, Hochul versus Zeldin. So she has 53% compared to Zeldin's 39%. What do you think about that lead, Mike? My first impression is I don't know if 14 points is a big enough gap that Hochul should be celebrating right now, but you tell me.
I think that's an awfully good point. The Siena poll gave it a 14-point lead for Governor Hochul, the Democrat. I guess I expected more. And I got to preface this with people I respect think that's a solid lead and that it'll only get bigger for Hochul. But me looking at this, she's the first woman running for to be elected governor. We had the Roe v. Wade decision by the Republican Supreme Court that struck it down. It seemed like there's and Lee Zeldin, the congressman from Long Island, who's running against her as a Republican, he wouldn't vote to certify the 2020 election loss by Trump. So all of that, I guess I expected 20 points or more. But, it's early, and as you said, it's a baseline. And, you and I both know that, just a little over a year ago, people thought Andrew Cuomo was going to win re-election. So anything can happen in Albany.
Right. I'm interested to see what Zeldin's final strategy is going into November. As of now, he's really hammered Hochul on things like cost of living. Obviously, he's pro-life, so she has that advantage of most New Yorkers favoring Roe v. Wade instead of opposing it. So she has that advantage. I'm interested to see what he actually does to try to cut away at that lead, because it looks like now it's a wide gap, certainly, but I think it's slim enough that if he really worked, maybe he could get closer. But I just don't know what he does.
Well, like you and I do, and the public doesn't have to do this, but as reporters, you and I do this, we look at the crosstabs of these polls, and that gives an indication deeper in the poll. And in that, Lee Zeldin, the Republican, he's doing really well upstate. He's doing really well in the suburbs. Frankly, the suburbs have been the key to statewide elections in the last bunch of years.
Always.
And Governor Hochul, she's from the suburbs. She's from an upstate suburb outside of Buffalo. So you'd have thought she'd do better than that. And as you're saying, Lee Zeldin has some powerful issues. The economy is not good. Crime is rising. He's talking about changes. The crosstabs almost look like a few years ago, if you remember, when there was just an anti-Democrat or anti-incumbent feeling out there. That's what it looks a little bit like, and we'll have to see, because Governor Hochul could get caught up in that. Although, given that Democrats do have a better than 2-to-1 enrollment advantage statewide.
Let's circle back to what you think the top issues are going to be for voters in this election in November. I think a lot of things can change between now and then. It's right. Only a few months, but issues come up all the time. I don't know if abortion would have necessarily been a big issue this year in this year's elections if the Supreme Court hadn't overturned Roe v. Wade. So when we're looking at what's going to matter in November, do you think that it's cost of living and crime? That seems to be the consensus that will be the issues that voters are going to speak to at the polls.
Going back decades, voters have been shown to be most focused on economics. How is their family budget faring? How's it doing, especially judging an incumbent by that standard? Up there always and often as a top figure is crime. So Lee Zeldin, the Republican, he might have a shot here because that's really his sweet spot. Which you bring up really a good point is the U.S. Supreme Court's decision led by the Republican majority to strike down Roe v. Wade abortion rights. That is resonating, though. We have to see what happens. Remember what happened in Kansas, where there was an overwhelming opposition to a referendum that would have allowed the legislature out there to make abortion illegal. So. Yeah. It seems to be resonating with voters. We'll have to see what happens in New York.
I think for sure, but I do think the Republicans have been just very, very effective with their crime messaging since bail reform went into effect. Honestly, it's been, almost every day. It's the issue that we hear about, and as we saw at the top of the show this week, that's a big issue this week. But we do have to leave it there. Michael Gormley from Newsday, thank you so much.
Take care, man.